Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hey, welcome to episode number 2 of the Equine Functional Posture Podcast. How are you going today, Soph?
Very well. Super keen for recording session number 2 and going into the power of observation for equine functional posture.
Yeah, today's topic is the power of observation. So it's going to be a really, really cool discussion.
Yes, especially with some awesome observations that have come out from the Equine Functional Posture course this last week. And of course, the Oxford Dictionary definition for observation is the action or process of closely observing and monitoring something. And that means being attentive, and it improves your decision making and your problem solving and being able to piece together complex parts of a whole.
Yeah, it's so important. I think when I started, well, even as a vet, we have a really strong power of observation because that helps us to make decisions and to put the picture together. But when I started equine muscle release therapy, we had to give a break, like between, we'd do a couple of moves and then we'd have to give the horse a break, and then we'd do a few more, the dog. And so I'd sit there for a lot of time and I'd just observe, and I'd notice things, like I'd notice a change in the breathing, I'd notice a change in the coat, I would notice a change in position of the horse or the dog, and then I'd ask the owner, is that normal for the animal? And some of them would say, I don't know, and other ones would say, oh no, never lays on that side, or he never rests that leg, or he never stands like that. But yeah, some people just wouldn't know whether their horse usually stood like that, or their coat usually looked like that, or their head position wasn't like that. And I trained my clients over time that their power of observation has become so instrumental. They now come to me before the horse is lame, and they'll say things like, oh, it's just always stand square, but this week I just noticed that in the front legs, they're not quite in line anymore. I can't feel anything. There's no obvious movement problems. There's no other changes that I've noted, but they're just not standing the same this week. And it makes it a bit more challenging for me because I have to find the problem. But it's also amazing because then we pick it up before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a genuine skill, for those people as they develop personally, the ability to, one, have been in interaction with you and you point out the things that have value or that, represent something in the body, whether it's, all the different dynamics of moving and standing posture, or, then them having to practice on their own horse. And of course, they're the best source for observing, how the horse is daily, how they are when they sleep, how they behave. And then just having to practice it. And, the more horses you see, the more developed your skill gets.
Yeah, and it really does. Like now, I can walk out in the dark with my horses and I will notice if something is not right. Like just through their outline or where they're standing, or I'll notice, even in the dark, I can kind of see how they're resting their legs or how they eat the food that I give them, whatever, or even how they come up normally. If I go to hang up their hay or something and they're not right there with me, then I'm thinking, what's going on here? Like, where are they? Why aren't they here right now? And I start to ask questions about that. So that's been trained over time, and people often say, I wish I could see what you could see, or what you can see. But I've trained that over 15 years so far of observation, or 20 years of being a vet. So 20 years of observations and just learning to take note of everything. And sometimes that's a very subconscious process. Like, I'll see a lot of things and I won't even have consciously thought about them, and then later on I'll go, oh, that's why he was standing like that, or that's why he did that, or when I asked him to do this, he didn't do that. So you often just get very subconscious in your observations, but until you practice and practice and practice, then you don't develop those observation skills, and so you often miss it until it's an obvious injury or sickness, and it's really affecting your horse.
There is a quote that was on the front of one of the manuals from a previous clinic from a few years ago about from Albert Einstein, that the only true knowledge is experience.
Yeah.
Which, like you said, you begin to pick up on things subconsciously when you have that much, information and time observing that you've consumed. But it all starts with the conscious action of recognizing and having to learn, certain patterns and things about your horses, and understanding horses and their response to their environment, and how much they're really, communicating and responding to the moment that they're in, and how they feel and what they're feeling in their body, how they feel, in their space, whether they feel safe and secure, and also in their interaction with you, and how they feel about you, and their associations to everything. Everything is an association: the time, the things you present them with, their experiences. It all adds up, to
Yeah, and I
warrant
think
further, or changes.
yeah, and I think that's really important to recognize that horses do act in the moment, and like whatever behavior they're giving to you in that moment is literally in that moment. Like, they're not doing it to annoy you generally, like they're doing it as a form of communication. And whether, like you said, that form of communication is, I don't feel balanced, I don't feel safe, I'm not happy with something in my environment, or I'm not feeling comfortable physically in my body. So, like, we're going to talk about a lot of postures in a minute, but I just, while I think of it, want to give an example of that, because yesterday I was doing a groundwork lesson with a horse. Now, she's a very experienced dressage horse, so you'd think that she would have really good balance. But we walk into the arena and she's looking at everything. Now, it's in her home environment. It's not like she was out at another venue. We were at her house. She's been in that arena a lot of times already. And we walk in the arena, she's looking this way, she's looking that way, she can't go in a straight line, and she's not looking at me, she's not responding to me. But so I just observed. I didn't think, oh, like, stop, stop pulling me around, or stop looking over there, like, just focus on me. I thought, okay, what's going on here? All right, she can't even go in a straight line. She can't even walk in a straight line. She does not feel safe in her body. She does not feel safe with me. And therefore, her environment has become her focus, and her ability to kind of ignore everything else that was going on. By the end of the lesson, and all I did was walk. I just asked her to walk in straight lines. I just asked her to balance her body. We did some halt walks. We also worked with the one pole, which we'll talk about at some point. And it was hard for her, okay? Like, we're just working with one pole, and it was a lot of pressure. And she's an experienced competitive horse. But by the end, she was walking around, she was relaxed, her head had lowered, her walk had gone from being almost too big and uncontrolled to just a nice relaxed walk. And the owner, I've known the owner for a really long time, but it's a newer horse. And she said, oh, it was so enlightening. You know, I didn't really recognize all those things. And the fact that, you know, she couldn't focus, and her distraction levels, yeah, she just hadn't really put them together. So we're going to be working with her once a week for a while, and it'll be really interesting to see, observe how her behavior changes as her body becomes a more balanced and safe place for her. And that is their safety. I'll just, you know, before we move on, like, their movement center of the brain is much bigger than ours. So their movement is more important to them than our movement is for us. Like, we don't have to quickly get away from a scary situation or from a predator. Like, we're not designed to run fast. We don't have to move that quickly. They have to respond. It's life or death for them. If they respond now or in a few seconds time, that could be the difference between life and death. And so a horse that doesn't feel like they can respond appropriately or move appropriately, whether that's because of you know, they're not balanced, or there's a physical, you know, the other way where they've got physical brace and tension, then they're going to be on high alert. So, and the more we reprimand that or see it as a negative thing, we're just basically saying, yep, you're not safe. No, yep, you're right, you're not safe. Like, we're not setting them up to help them feel safe in that moment. So do you know, because there's been a bit of work kind of done around recognizing ways that we can look, you know, for things like pain, because that's something we want to obviously observe for. It's really important for the well-being of our horses. What kind of systems are you familiar with in relation to that?
In terms of structured systems that are available for people to start viewing, you've got the horse grimace scale, which is a pain face ethogram developed by in 2014 by Talacosta, and it gives you a chart that actually has really valuable pictures where you can see different parts of the horse's face using the eye, ears, chin, muzzle, and little marks around the nostrils and also the eyebrows to grade your horse's emotional state in relation to pain. So that's one system. You've also got the ridden horse ethogram by Sue Dyson. That means you can view horses for a 5 to 10 minute period and see if there's the presence of up to 8 behaviours that indicate that there is a presence of discomfort, a likely presence of discomfort within a horse, you know, from a selection of behaviours, you know, seeing if they are represented in the horse being ridden. And they're both very, very valuable, you know, for people to use. But there's also your everyday things that, you know, when you get into postures, you know, so not a specific behavior, but postures that horses choose to be in, you know, through urination, defecation, you know, how they move around, how they eat. And all of those things relate to their health, their movement, and their well-being, you know, and not just discomfort, you know, being unbalanced and, you know, maybe issues that they have with their tummy or old injuries that influence the way that they move and the movement patterns that you develop in your brain, you know, habitual movements as well. Doesn't necessarily mean the horse has to be uncomfortable, but it still means that over time, you know, those movements might not be as sustainable as other ones that we can, you know, ask them to move into to improve. But unless you can see that there is a movement pattern that maybe isn't ideal for them or something is speaking to you, you can't really make an informed decision about, you know, about how to change and what to change as well. And that's why it's so powerful, you know, like this topic, the power of observation, what it means to you and what it means for your horse, to create change.
Yeah, and I'd like to just go into a bit more detail there where you talked about like the pain face and the ridden horse ethogram and just give a bit of an example. So with the pain face, one of the ponies that I had, Patch, it was really interesting because when I first got her, her little muzzle was like so scrunchy, and there was a lot of tension around her eyes specifically, and her nostrils, especially in work, but even just in the paddock. And I think the best day for me was when I was working her on the ground and her little muzzle was like so soft that it was like going along, just kind of softly moving with her movement, and the change in her eyes, and how much softer. And it's like you said, it can be related to pain, discomfort, or something that they're not happy with. And some horses are very expressive and others not so much. But looking at their chins, their muzzles, the tension under and above their eyes, their ear positions in different things that they're doing, is really, really valuable information. And again, it's not always about going, oh, my horse has a tight muzzle, they must be in pain. It's like, oh, my horse has a tight muzzle. That's interesting. And it only is tight in these situations. That's interesting. So you don't have to come to any conclusion about it. You just go, oh, that's interesting. And then maybe you notice that when you've worked with the horse, working on balance or posture, or maybe it's hoof comfort or diet or gut, or something that you've noticed is not right. And then you see the face change and you're like, oh, okay, well, we've figured out maybe the underlying cause here of that. But you don't have to figure it out straight away. You just have to observe and acknowledge that there's something there going on with the horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with the ridden horse ethogram, so you mentioned that, but could you just give some examples of some of those behaviours that you might see in a ridden horse that would highlight you know, that there could be something that you want to kind of pay more attention to?
So those are your horse's willingness to do what you asked. And just when you conceptualize willingness, it's the idea of what your horse values in the moment. So if your horse values avoiding a certain movement, you are going to get less willingness to do said thing when you give them a cue, you know, not in the context of them not understanding the cue, but being less willing to give you what you're asking for in order to earn their release.
Such as you're doing a shoulder in, and on the right shoulder in, no problems, you know, super responsive, super happy to go into it. You go to do the left shoulder in and maybe they twist their head or swish their tail or resist on the bit or something, or push against your leg, something like that, where you've got a different.
Yeah, exactly. And those are examples within your ethogram, including, you know, swishing of the tail or the whole head, the head having a twisting posture, or the horse trying to be in an extended head posture, or choosing to go behind the vertical for, you know, a few seconds. It also includes moments where they're unable to strike off the right lead, or they begin to counter canter, small humps, bucking, rearing, bolting, you know, all the larger ones, but it also includes those smaller behaviors, you know, missteps and small things that could be counted as a mistake, but are also, you know, represent comfort or, you know, the horse compensating for something.
Yeah, and we've got to be really careful there. That I've had some of my clients that then blame themselves. So they'll say, oh, my horse struggles with the downward transition or the strike off into canter, and they'll say, oh, but I just have to get the horse in the right position to do the transition or do the canter strike off. And yes, that's important, and you can definitely help them once you recognize the problem, but that's not an excuse. Like you can't always say, oh, it's just my riding, because there's often more to it than that. Like, yes, we influence horses a lot with the way that we ride in positive and negative ways, but if your horse is finding one thing difficult, you want to rule out their, you know, physical restrictions, whether it's a restriction or a pain or a symmetry issue or whatever. You really want to look closely at that before you just go out to training problem with me or the horse.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you hear that a lot. When I'm doing bodywork session with somebody, they say, oh, like she says, they'll say, oh, I'm a bit changed. My balance has changed or something. And, I don't know if it's always me, but they'll describe something that's a consistent symptom, with the horse.
Is what you're
And
finding.
yeah, and that's also a reflection of how the industry and spaces are changing. She's heard an adult riding club that, these are things that can indicate something. And so she's looking for, who can I find that can help me either work through the solution or understand if it's a me or the horse issue. And so that's the change in the space as well, which is also why we're doing this podcast. There's awareness and interest is growing, in that direction.
Yeah. And that's really important for people to find the team, which we're going to talk about in future podcasts, to help them investigate any things that they notice as well. Have someone that they can go to who's not just going to say, no, like it's just a training issue or your horse is just being an idiot kind of thing. So
yeah.
So yeah, we can see obvious things when we're riding. And that's often, where things might be highlighted a little bit, but just in the paddock. So you mentioned like urination and defecation and things like that. That for me is massive. Like you can easily observe your horse as many times a day as you see them, basically, without doing anything to them. So just yesterday, I was treating a 24-year-old horse who hadn't had much body work before. And after his treatment, he went and urinated. And the owner said, oh my gosh, I haven't seen him urinate. Like he looks so comfortable when he's urinating now. And he just hasn't looked that comfortable for such a long time. And so those postures are so informative. So with urination, like I think we talked about these last week as well, or in the last episode, but yeah, being able to know A, what's normal for your horse, but B, what also is normal, like because what's normal for your horse, if it might be restricted. So you also want to know what a comfortable horse that's urinating or defecating does look like, and also what's normal for your horse and has it changed. So every opportunity that you spend with your horse is an opportunity to gain some information about them. And I'm lucky my horse, some of them I can see out the window. And I was looking the other day and I was watching my young horse grazing. And so you could just say, oh yeah, my young horse is grazing, big deal. But I was like, what leg is she standing with? Which one is forward? Which one is back? Is she walking while she grazes? Or does she stop, graze, head up, walk, stop, graze? She walked, put her right foot forward, grazed for a while, kept her head down, left foot forward, grazed for a while, and continued to do that. And I was like, that's great. Because we see some horses in grazing that are like, they just have this set posture, one forward and one back. And then when they move, they just kind of take a little step and a little step with one, and they stay in the same posture. So just being able, like actually taking in that information in those moments is so useful for you to pick up little things, and also to know if your horse does always graze in a certain pattern, well, that's really not going to help you when you're riding the horse, because they're going to have a strong predisposition to a certain pattern. And so what kind of things could you do to rectify that? What else, like in the paddock, could people notice?
So you can observe, obviously you can graze off the ground, which is good for a horse for most of the time, but often There are some people who are already experimenting with their variable feeding positions and who are, you know, maybe using things like hay nets, hay bales. You also feed hard feeds. So you can see how your horse interacts with those things. So maybe how they stand at the hay bale, how they move their neck, what part of their body they will load and unload, whether or not it's a hind leg, if they will choose to stand square or not square when they're standing at a hay bale, but also how is their rug fitting? You know, sometimes you hear about horses or you see horses who have rug rubble in their shoulders, or when they walk up, the whole rug is really shifted. So one side is lower, but you're looking for, is this consistent? You know, does it show up, or has it turned up one time and it's worth investigating? You know, is my horse walking a bit differently, or has he just had a big scratch on the tree and he's pulled his rug to one side? Or it might be small things like your horse is always tearing their rug somewhere. Does that mean that they're scratching something in particular, a structure, or, you know, these sorts of things that just say, is it a once off? Is it consistent? You know, and why? Obviously with rugs, you've got to get fit right, but it's just something that stands out if, you know, there could be an issue there. You can also, when you're picking your horse's feet out, how willing are they to pick up the hoof, you know, and how long can they hold it up? Can they, you know, extend the hoof out the back for the farrier, and can they bring it underneath them forward? Is there times that they'll yank it off you, or that they have to really lean back, you know, to load something else because they're like, oh, you know, and how do they communicate about it? Are they sharp
Yeah.
in pulling it away? Do they adjust themselves without telling you that I need that hoof back? You know, do they ask gently?
Yeah, some
And also,
horses are so polite with that. And Pat would, I remember seeing her with a farrier one day, and she just was slowly, her back legs were creeping more and more forward to the point that they ended up under her belly. And she never pulled her leg away in that whole time. And it wasn't, and you know, I was thinking, oh, I hope he puts it down soon. I hope he puts it down soon. In the end, I was like, can you please put her leg down? Like, she is not okay, but she's not going to tell you she's not okay, because that's her that's her training. That's the type of horse she is. And she got more communicative, but yeah, like that day I just thought, holy crap, she's willing to really sacrifice herself because she's just behaving really well. But I could see it in the posture. And then even just this morning, I had my horse's feet trimmed, and we were just putting some boots on Jelly to have a look at the fit of the boots. And usually he's so polite with his feet. Like if I walk around his body, he'll have the next foot up by the time I'm heading there. So he knows, yep, here you go. But he's like, he just put his foot down. He did not want me to take the boot off. And he's like, well, you taught me how to communicate, and I'm telling you, I'd really like you to leave my boot on today. And I was like, I'm really sorry, but the other boot needs fixing and I can't leave your boot on today. And he was so adamant. Like he never has been so adamant before, but he was like, I really want you to leave my boots on today. And I was like, this is great. I'm so glad that you're communicating with me, but I'm really sorry to take it off today. But I just wanted to say there, when I do my bodywork checks, I just go around and I touch the horse's legs and I see, with a little shift of my weight, will they offload the leg? I never squeeze the chestnut, I never squeeze the tendon, unless I like have to get that foot up for some like essential reason. And people will say, oh, like just he'll lift his foot up. I'm like, no, I'm asking a different question. I'm asking the question, can you lift your foot up? Not lift your foot up now. And when I ask that question, it's really surprising how many horses will say, no, I can't lift that foot up. Like, do you find that?
absolutely. And the difference sometimes when, you know, it's the intention behind what you're asking. It's
And the
do
weight, like,
and the way with which you ask, you know, if you can come down the leg and just be like, hi, I'm asking you to lift. Can you nicely sort of give me the foot, and also, you know, just the willingness with which how much pressure do I have to use? And that's just information, and coming around. And then when you're soft, you can see, oh, this leg does come up easily and this one doesn't, or it comes up and it wants to sit in a different position if you aren't holding it so tight. And I do often hear from people like, I'm so sorry, he's normally very good. He's very good. And that horse understands, like, I don't really have an option, because if I say no, somebody interprets me as maybe being lazy or being naughty, as opposed to having a hard time with this. And so when you're very soft and you say, like, can you do it? And you get an honest answer, that's a little bit different, to making somebody do something.
Yeah, and often those things are on autopilot, like they know, okay, you're cleaning out my feet now. And so they just pick up each leg because they know the system of cleaning out each foot. However, when we come in, we're asking a different question and then we get a different answer. So going with the hoof pick even could give you a different answer, because they see the hoof pick, they know the association. You go in without the hoof pick as an owner and you just go around, they're going to be thinking a little bit differently in that situation. So you might get a different answer. So I think that's important too, like recognizing how you ask, what triggers are there, and like associated with how you ask, and then also being willing to observe and accept what their answer is.
Yes, absolutely.
And then potentially investigate that.
Yeah, yeah. And all of these things come together, and it means that you can work with your team as well, on the topic of hoof care. If you are observing things in your horse, you can mention them to the people that you have in routine care, whether it's your body worker, your saddle fitter, your farrier, and you can communicate, I've seen this, this has changed, and they can say, oh, if it's represented in the hoof, or it's represented somewhere in their assessment as well, and it just helps to tie things together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, well, like we've talked about how they pick up their feet, but there's other things that we can see too in their standing posture. So we've talked about things that we might see in their movement in terms of the ethograms and stuff, but in terms of their standing posture, like looking at things like how their limbs are positioned relative to their body. Do they stand with their forelimbs right underneath their body or right out, or one limb always is resting, one limb is always in a certain position, and if they're resting, does the resting position look normal and comfortable? Because sometimes like horses should be able to rest both back legs, but there shouldn't really be a predominance much towards one, and it should look in a comfortable and balanced position. The same with their like, if we look at the rest of their body, we talked about head and neck position a little bit before in riding, like do they want to put it up or really low? And it's the same in their standing position. Do they always have their head up, which often they'll, with their head up like that, they'll be on alert? Or horses that are sick, or they have neck pain, or maybe they've got a really sore hind end, like some of them will travel with a really low head position. So that's a lot of information there. What else do you see like in that kind of standing position?
I know when it comes to my own, because I'm on a really undulating sort of hilly area, and I do use the hills a little bit, that I can see a difference in how they stand when I'm on flatter areas as opposed to on the hill, and also how they stand themselves. So I know that Charlie will often stand very slightly if he's facing uphill with his head to the left, so that his right hind is on the uphill, and he'll rest that one. So it's not It's not the one taking the weight. And so it's a little like, yay, when I catch him in a position where he's choosing to have that on the downhill, but it's very distinct in lots of spaces. And it's also distinct in how he'll choose to walk across the paddock towards me. And surfaces as well. How does he walk, on different surfaces and on the concrete? Soft and hard surfaces, all those generalized things. When I stand him on a little bit of concrete, he stands very differently and picks and places his limbs very differently to when we're on the grass or on the sand or the gravel.
And that could also relate, like if you do happen to have different surfaces in your paddock, like what surface does your horse choose? Because that could give you information. Like you talked about the hills and how they choose to stand on a hill, but also, do they go stand in the soft part of the paddock? Do they go stand in the firmer ground? Do they position their hind end up or their front end up or their front end down? Or that's really useful information, just looking at how they stand, where they stand, and what they stand on. So
Definitely.
yeah. What
And
about oh, sorry.
I was going to say, when you consider, say, being in the paddock with their, in the space that they live in, what other things can you look for?
Yeah, in their paddock, like we can look for how they interact with the other horses. So what I noticed last year in winter, Henry got really cranky with the other horses. All of a sudden, he started biting them. And he just was unhappy. And so at that point I was like, well, I know he's got a lot of physical issues. So I was thinking, is it maybe time? So at that point I put him on Alleviate, the herbal anti-inflammatory from McDowell's, and there was an immediate change in his behavior. So he was again happy with the other horse. His posture started to improve again. So his behavior towards the other horses was really important for me to observe. Like I just could have said, oh, he's just a grumpy old man. Like he's just being grumpy, Henry. Stop being grumpy. But I was like, no, what? It was affecting my other horse because she was getting bitten and having to move suddenly. So, and B, he wasn't very happy either. So we have to really look at how they interact with other horses, and how they how they also interact with us, and also when they move around, or when we move them around, how they navigate things like obstacles. Do they just smash into things, or are they actually aware where they put their limbs? And yeah, just look at kind of all of those aspects.
Come together. I know that I've recently seen a client who had actually patted the inside of her rug because her horse kept clipping, even, walking in and out of a stable, he keeps clipping his hips on the door. And so she's got foam pads on there, and also just a little bit of extra cushioning in the form of like fabric on the inside of his rug because he keeps bumping them. And when we went further in, it's into the assessment, it's also been represented in his willingness to go in certain directions and the gaits that he'll pick up. When he has to do a canter, you're really looking for more motion. And so, it's just those small things that you tie together when you do more investigation, and the whole thing just comes together. Yeah, but there's a lot of pieces, that have to come together. Yeah, and I wouldn't have possibly noticed that if she hadn't been paying attention and being like, why is this happening? And I'm accommodating for it, and then I find something, and a hoof care provider had comments. So and that comes back to the whole value of this,
everyone's observing, not just going through their business and they're not kind of thinking about things. Like they're all computing little things and going, oh yeah, the hoof balance has changed, or now I've got the walls all padded up, and the canter has changed and the muscling has changed. And yeah, if you weren't looking, and also you can pad things up and then not think about why the horse might be hitting itself on the stable. Like that's not normal. They should be very aware of their body, and they should know, like when they're walking outside a door or maneuvering, you turn them, like they should be able, we shouldn't have to look after them every step of the way through an unpredictable, uneven environment. They should have enough awareness, balance, maneuverability to be able to handle themselves in that situation. So yeah, it's really valuable that you and her were able to put those pieces together, and it really shows the value and the importance of
Yeah.
observation.
Observation. Yeah. Yeah. And your ability to think critically, about am I getting the desired effect on my horse's posture from certain things? Because lots of people are thinking about self-carriage and posture, and being able to think critically. Am I getting the results? Am I not getting the results? And
Always
also,
asking the question.
absolutely. And how do I need to accommodate my horse at this time? And what are my goals going to be in the future? And how do I, use my environment and, the resources that I have, or how to be creative, with everything from paddock management, feeding, and movement to make changes and be able to monitor them. And that, thinking about timelines and record keeping also,
Yeah, making some notes, taking some photos, videos are so useful to have as a record kind of keeping for future. And I think, to wind up, like being able to observe yourself, your horse's behaviors, and we've talked about many areas that you can observe in terms of facial expressions, limb positions, grazing, defecation, urination, behaviors when being ridden. Like there's so much information that we can really gain on a daily basis. And one aspect I'd really like to highlight there is that, horses are so sensitive to us. They can feel our heart beating. They are very responsive to us. And the more we open that channel of communication through our ability to observe, the more they're going to give us the feedback. And like with Jelly today, he's getting more and more communicative all the time. And he really tells me now how he feels about everything that we do. And it's very polite, like it's a little change in his facial expression, a little resting of his muzzle on my arm, or today, not picking up his leg. But if you don't open that line of communication through the observation, you will never develop that sort of relationship with your horse, and you'll just always miss those little cues that you could have picked up so early on and stopped it from becoming a big problem that now is going to take 6-12 months, or maybe it won't, maybe it's not rectifiable. Yeah, it's just so valuable. Like I just can't reiterate it enough. Do you have any closing words there?
Just that, on that topic of communication, horses are, so inherently driven towards connection and harmony. And to be able to be in a space where your communication is acknowledged and it's received and it's respected.
Yeah.
That sometimes that in itself is something that they'll give you more because they don't feel like you're going to take more than what they have to give you, while also preserving, their own physical integrity and also their emotional integrity. Yeah, we have a lot to offer them, and they can offer us more when they feel safe to.
100%. Yeah, I think that's the important word there, is safety. So Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. It's always so many things that we can talk about, and hopefully now you go out and just observe a little more about your horse today, and open up those channels of communication a little bit more. So thanks, everybody. We will chat to you in the next episode. Thanks, Soph, and
Thanks.
see you later.
Bye.